My guest today is Allison Lettieri. Allison is a marketing leader, startup advisor, and author. She's built marketing from scratch to scale at fast-growing Silicon Valley companies, including Intuit, Thumbtack, and Handshake. Now she advises early-stage tech startup leaders on go-to marketing strategy to drive rapid growth. Allison is also the author of Standout Startup, a guide to creating effective messaging and content. And so today, Allison is going to talk all about the 3 Ps needed to create effective messaging. What are they and why do they matter? And what's the difference between messaging and copy, and which do you need first? We get into a whole lot more, including the P of personality and how a brand can have personality without needing to be funny. Let's dive right in. Allison, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you on.
Thank you, Linda. Great to be here.
Yeah, I've heard you on several other podcasts, and I wanted to ask you first how, because everyone asks this, but I'm genuinely interested because there's so many people getting into marketing. And how did you end up? You specialize really in early stage tech startups. So how did that come about? And how did you start in marketing, and how did you specialize in this?
Yes, it definitely evolved over the years. And I've worked in companies that range from the earliest stage to very mature public companies like Intuit. I actually got my career start at the Boston Consulting Group, and I was working mostly in sales and marketing projects for retail and consumer goods companies, which was really exciting. So big brand names who had big advertising budgets, and also retail stores, and learned a lot about growth marketing through that. Then I went to business school and had the opportunity to move to Hong Kong, actually, for my husband's job, and got a job at Intuit that was expanding to Asia at the time. And at Intuit, I really became a product marketer, was working in global offices where we were launching new products that were custom built for local markets, and learned all about go-to-market strategy, how to figure out exactly who you're targeting, how to talk to them about the positioning and the differences in your product versus the alternatives, and also how to create really strong messaging to launch. So that was exciting. But once I transitioned to working in the main company of Intuit, I realized I really liked that startup environment of the country offices that were more of a microcosm of the company. And so I decided to go the startup route. And I worked for 3 years at a marketplace called Thumbtack that helps you find local service providers to do anything on your to-do list. Built the team from scratch across all the functions, and then wanted to build from scratch again. So went to a company called Handshake that helps companies recruit college students and college students find their first jobs. And so have worn a lot of marketing hats, but at the core have always really loved product marketing, where I've had to work with the team to articulate who our product is for, why it's the best choice for our target customers, and launch exciting features along the way.
What do you love about it? Because marketing is one of those things that it can be tough. I mean, it's very competitive. So what is it that really drew you to marketing?
Part of what I love about marketing is it's so tied to the strategy of the overall company. So you're making decisions not just about what to build, because many times marketing does influence the roadmap, but exactly who you're building for, what to prioritize, and then how to take that to market, how to go out and make people aware of this amazing product, help them choose it, and experiment with a lot of different levers to see what works and drives the sales and revenue. I also really like the customer marketing part of marketing. So it's not just acquiring the new customers, but it's making sure that the customers you have really understand the value of the product and are getting the most out of the new features you're launching. So there's always something new. And another thing I actually love about marketing is the seasonality. So having worked at many companies and gone through multiple cycles of the year, you start to realize that there's a lot of power in matching what you're saying in the market to what's happening in the lives of the customers and what they're really thinking about. Whether it's something that recurs every year, like a slow season or a peak season where they really need to do different things in your product, or it's a trending topic that is making everyone think differently about the way they're solving problems. And so marketing is really at the forefront of saying, okay, we've got this product. How do we fit this into the narrative of what's happening in our customers' lives? So that they're really excited and use it and get the value.
That's so interesting, because when I used to do article writing for magazines, and whenever there was like something new that happened, an extreme example, of course, is COVID, where there was nothing that you could write. I wasn't writing for magazines at the time, but I was told by a couple editors that that's all they're writing about. you know?
Yes.
So it's like you have to get on that bandwagon, but then it would be all the writers who are pitching stories on that trending topic. And then what happens when the trend is not there, then you have, you know, it's not an evergreen thing, but you do have to have those, you know, in every, I would imagine, in every marketing.
Completely agree. Yeah, parallel pathing those evergreen storylines that are either going to recur every year or just emphasizing what are the most important things that a customer should be doing in your product to get the results they want. That's an important part of marketing. But then, as you said, staying nimble and being able to react to the story of the day and tie it into what's relevant to your customer is a really exciting but challenging part of it.
Yeah, it's never the same, right?
Right.
So, in your book, you talk about the 3 Ps to create effective messaging. Can you talk about what they are and why they matter?
Yes. As I pivoted from working full-time in startups, leading marketing teams, to advising early-stage startups, I found that a pinch point for many founders was actually creating messaging to articulate what their product is, who they're serving, and why it's different and better in the market. And so lots of times I would get questions like, hey, can you take a look at my website and tell me if it's good or bad? What should I do to change it? Or my sales team, every person is saying something different. I don't know how to get it under control. I close deals. I know what I say works, but I'm not sure they're saying the best things. And so the pinch point kept coming back to messaging. How do we articulate the value of our product and who it's for? Mm-hmm. And what I found is that in order to create effective messaging, you really have to understand the 3 Ps. Number 1 is your persona. So who exactly are you talking to and what do they value about your product? How can you describe it in a way that feels very important to them, like it will solve their challenges and give them the results they want? The second thing you need to be able to do is to explain the positioning. So why is it different and better than the alternatives they could choose? And sometimes that's the other tech product solutions they could buy. But many times that's actually piecing together different products to solve the problem or not doing anything or doing something manual. So having a really clear and strong way of describing why your product is the best choice. And then the third piece is your personality. Mm-hmm. So how do you talk in a way that builds a connection and affinity with your ideal audience? Because you can say this, you can describe the product and its differentiators in lots of different ways, but I have found that to really be able to say, is this on brand? Is this describing the product in the way we want? You have to put some work into your tone of voice and personality too.
It seems like that third part is what is missing. Well, I mean, I'm sure. In fact, I'll ask you which one you feel is missing most. But to me, it's like the personality part, especially in B2B. Companies are afraid to use a personality. It's like, and this is what, even when I write copy for a website, a lot of times the website, because I do work with a lot of tech companies, it's very dry. And it's, you know, the stock photos of somebody holding a cell phone. I'm like, okay, this is a family-run business. Why do you have this looking like it's IBM, you know? But which one do you feel is most lacking or most challenging maybe to get out of those 3?
It's a good question. I find that all 3 of them tend to be lacking. So many times the website or the sales deck that I'm reviewing is talking to a company, but not a person or a decision maker in that company, or there's lack of clarity on which segment they're going after. So they're blending a lot of messages and it just falls flat. So I see that as a persistent challenge. The differentiation part, it's surprising how hard companies make their prospective customers work to figure out why are they better.
Yeah.
And just putting a finer point on exactly why your product is the no-brainer best choice for that persona you're talking to significantly increases conversion. Don't make someone work hard for that.
Yeah.
But I agree, the personality piece is often overlooked, and the default personality tends to be pretty straightforward, dry, or ChatGPT copy and paste type writing, or it tends to be technical because so many of the founders I work with are technical founders with product or engineering backgrounds. And so one of the tools I love to use is personality archetypes to figure out what is the best way to fine tune this and give this a different edge, because a personality can actually serve as a strong differentiator and create contrast with a competitor. So it's worth spending some time and ironing that out.
Yeah. Thinking of Dollar Shave Club. I mean, those types of ads, I mean, very distinct and very, you know, unique. It's funny that you say about, you know, making people work hard. Like, you don't want to make people work hard when they get to your site. Yesterday, I was looking for like prepared meals that are delivered to your home. And there's this one company who I won't mention because it's just irrelevant, because I went to the site. I just wanted to know, how does this work? What am I going to get? How many meals? What is the cost? None of that was anywhere on the site until you fill out a form and enter your credit card information. I'm like, there is just no way, Jose. So what did I do? I go on Reddit, because Reddit is like, people are always talking. And sure enough, I found this brand and people were asking questions like, is it really economically feasible? Do you save money? And across the board, they're like, it's just a waste. Like, it just costs so much, like $30 for 2 people for a pasta dish. They said, that's crazy. You can get like, 14 pounds of pasta in some jar.
Right. But they were hiding that and making that hard to find.
Yeah. And it was just really annoying.
Well, another thing that I find with messaging is a lot of founders are not thinking about it along the customer journey. So the information a prospective customer needs is different based on where they are in their buyer journey.
Right.
And so I think of it in 3 main phases. The first is what's making them aware of your product for the first time. And usually you need a really compelling hook that speaks to a pain point that they're struggling with, or a result that they really want, to bring them into your marketing universe and get them to your website or exploring your content. But then the second phase is convince them that you can get the results they want and you do it better than anyone else. And I call that nurture content. And it's really focused more on the value and the benefits and proof points that you can deliver that. But the last phase is conversion. And this is when you do need to get into the nitty-gritty product details and the pricing nuances and everything else. And customers can't make a decision until they see that information, but they don't need that first in many cases, unless they're already far along on the buyer's path. So when we talk about messaging, many times it is this progression of what is our product, and then what are the 3 biggest differentiated benefits of using the product, and then prove it. Prove that you can deliver this through data, customer stories, et cetera. But that's not enough. You also have to think about the nuances of that conversion content to make sure people have what they need to make that final decision.
Yeah. And working with early stage startups, do you run into a lot of people who are like, we're not really sure where we stand with some of these things? Like, how do you address that? Like, maybe they don't know what their value proposition is like yet.
Yes. So absolutely. In early stage startups, all of these questions around who are we serving? Who is our product really helping? What does our product exactly look like? And what does it do? Everything's very much in flux and evolving rapidly. The good news, though, is I found the same process to figure out your there's no such thing as forever messaging, but to figure out your settled messaging helps even when you're just in this rapid iteration state. So any experiments you're running or any landing page you put up just to see if it attracts customers or gets them to take that next action, it's still extremely helpful to decide who you're trying to talk to, figure out what would be most beneficial to them. How could you describe your product in a way that really resonates with them and what differentiates it? And then show proof points that tell your story more effectively. So yes, things evolve. And it's part of why I think every founder, even if they don't consider themselves a marketer, should learn this process or at least know these ingredients so that they do feel comfortable iterating. The alternative, what I see a lot, is explaining the technical features of your product and hoping that customers will be able to read between the lines and interpret, oh, if it has that functional capability, it will solve this problem. But many times customers, A, aren't spending that much time on your page, so they're not piecing it together. And it's not always obvious what results it will get. So even for early stage startups, I think it's important to put a stake in the ground around messaging and test and iterate.
Yeah. And you probably do a lot of research with competitors, I imagine, right?
Yeah, that's important, because if you could copy and paste the messaging on your website onto a competitor's website and it would portray their product, then you've missed the mark. Because again, you're not really speaking to that competitive edge that you have. And it's important, as I mentioned earlier, not just to think about the direct competitors, but in many cases, startups really are blazing new trails. They're solving problems in ways that have never been done before, or addressing problems that have frankly been overlooked and unsolvable. So lots of times the biggest competitor is do nothing. Someone just being willing to maintain the status quo, or piecing together things they've built in-house, or manual solutions. And so convincing them that there's a better way that is tech enabled is often the work of these early stage startups. So not overlooking those hidden competitors that are actually the main things you're up against is important.
Yeah. And I think especially the status quo, because people are very, it's hard to change. You know, when you've been doing something for a long time, I ran into this with a company that does, it's an app for, they enable you to take a paper form and create an app for it, like a mobile form. And that was their struggles. Like people were so used to, you know, the paperwork, even though it was so laborious, it's like, well, this is how we've been doing it. And that was what they were up against, which seems insane.
Right. Well, it feels safer. You know how to do it. It costs less. So these really are big mental blockers. And these are objections that you also need to proactively understand about the persona you're talking to and address them in the messaging and other content you create.
Yeah, exactly. When you talk about messaging and copy, so a lot of what you're saying also refers to like copywriting, like I can relate it to what I do. What is the difference? How do they work together?
Yes. I really think of creating customer-facing collateral, so that new website or your new sales deck or a new email sequence, as 3 steps. So the first, again, is honing in on those 3 Ps. Who are you talking to? What's different and better? And how do you want to express yourself through your personality? Then you're creating a messaging framework that's really the key ideas you want to get across in the collateral or any conversation you have. And it tends to have 3 key components when you're talking about product messaging. The first is your unique selling proposition. So we are a what kind of product for who that delivers what big outcome. So it's that elevator pitch. But again, it's surprising how many companies make it kind of hard to know what exactly are you selling? What is this product? So you cover that in the USP. Then the 3 differentiated benefits. And these are the 3 messages that if your prospective customer only remembered 3 things, these would be the things that would close the deal. These are the messages they need to know to believe this is the product that can get results for me and it's better than the alternatives. And then the third point is proof points that supports that. But even when you have that messaging framework, you don't have copy yet necessarily. There's lots of different ways to say those messages, depending on if you're writing an email that needs to be short and punchy, or you have more room on your website, or maybe you're writing a long form blog post that actually talks about the 4 things you need to consider when buying a product like ours. So copy involves turning that into the words that you want to use to communicate with your customers. And there's lots of tips for doing that more effectively. But one thing I encourage founders to do is don't get blocked by the copywriting yet. First, get those messages nailed down. And then it's so much easier to figure out exactly how you want to say it to customers or to hand it to a designer and a copywriter so that they can translate that into the words for the actual marketing collateral that you're creating.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I remember when I took a copywriting course and we had all these different points we had to remember with our copy. And the one everyone struggled with was, what's your big idea?
Yes.
And that was the hardest one. And people were just, the copywriting coach was just getting forever frustrated with us because it's kind of an abstract thing. How would you define it? Like the big idea?
Well, it's a great question. The messaging you have, there's a few big ideas wrapped up in that. First is what's our product and what's its promise? Because people are not buying a product, they're buying a transformation. Right. They're buying a big change that they need. And so you cover that in the USP. Then it's, okay, yes, I want that transformation, but why you? Why is your product the right one for that? And that's what you cover in the value props. And then it's, okay, this sounds too good to be true, prove it. And now with the social proof and other proof points, you're backing up those ideas. But it's nice to think of your messaging framework as a rubric for what needs to appear on a website. So when you jump straight into copywriting, I've got this great product, I'm just going to start to fill out the modules on my homepage. It's hard to know if you have incorporated those big ideas. Yeah. There's lots of different amazing things to say about your product because it's groundbreaking and it is creating change in customers' lives. But having the discipline to figure out the key ideas first and then figure out how to communicate them in the collateral, I think is that difference between the messaging framework as the guidelines, and then the customer-facing copy that comes after that.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned earlier something about your copy doesn't always, or your messaging doesn't always stay the same. Does it evolve? And how do you know it's time to evolve? Like, when do you change it or
great question.
Consider it?
So some of the signals that your copy is probably, or your messaging and copy are out of date are things like, I'm embarrassed to send my customers or my prospects to my website because it's not saying the right thing.
Right.
Like it's a few versions outdated, or I say it so much more clearly in my sales pitch.
Yeah.
That's not great.
Yeah.
Or this feeling that everyone in the company is describing your 3 value props differently. Everyone has a different way of explaining why your product is so much better and the right choice. In some cases too, there's clear things that are happening either with your product or in the market that show you've got to shift. And so, especially in early stage startups, but any growth company, you will be releasing features and functionality over time, or maybe you're making acquisitions and you want to make sure that those amazing new capabilities that you're introducing support that value story you're telling. So in some cases, new features support a value prop you're already emphasizing. As an example, at Handshake, one of our top value props was giving employers ways to communicate with college students that were unlike anything they could find in other applications. But over time, we strengthened that story. We introduced messages and a content feed and ambassadors and other great ways of communicating with college students. But sometimes you introduce something that's so different and new that it actually needs to become one of your new value props. And you need to replace that across your website and all the other touch points. But that's not the only time things change. Many times competitors will come in and either copy or kind of chip away at some of the things that differentiated you before.
Yeah.
And so now you need to find a new way to explain why you're so much but different or better. And also, I often see companies facing either customer preferences have changed, or they've nailed, they've really been successful with one customer segment and they want to expand into a new customer segment. And so they need to find a new way of describing their product and its value to that new segment so that they're excited about and start buying the product too.
Yeah, it was a big thing in the news recently how Campbell's Soup Company just changed their name to Campbell's because they said we're so much more than soup, and people associate us with soup. And even just dropping that was like a huge thing because Campbell's has been around forever, right?
Exactly. Yes, that's a great example. It's suddenly you outgrow what you used to be and you need to make sure that your messaging catches up with that.
Yeah, and there's some other ones I heard of recently, but that's such a huge undertaking, I would imagine, for a company that size to just completely, maybe not dropping that one name, but I mean, I imagine it could be, and especially if it's misaligned, like maybe you do it and then it's like, maybe we should stick with what we had.
Completely agree. And it's one of the reasons I really encourage companies to simplify their content strategy and their touchpoint strategy as much as possible, because when you do have to make these sweeping messaging changes, there are a lot of touch points that need to be updated. So having some sense for what are the most important and the highest traffic or the highest visibility touch points that have to get refreshed is really important, because it can feel overwhelming. And you do want to feel iterative. You don't want it to feel like a 6-month effort every time you have to update something.
Right.
So it's something companies need to be very intentional with, especially at the early stage when things are changing every week or month.
Yeah. And when you talk about the 3 Ps, and one of them is personality. And we talked about this before we actually got on and recorded this, but I have a big thing about humor. I love humor. I'm a big stand-up comedy fan. And so, but people, and especially B2B, they're very hesitant to use humor. But how can you use personality without humor, or do they go hand in hand? How do you know when it's okay to use it, or how can you use it?
It's such a good question, and it trips up a lot of founders who do want to infuse a different tone of voice and some character into their copy, but they feel like they're not the funny brand. It's not appropriate. And it's true. It's not appropriate for a lot of brands. But that's why I love archetypes, because they offer a whole range of ways you can be provocative and interesting in your copy and your tone, but not have to be funny. So the Jester embodies they're all about entertainment. And so they are going to talk in a more humorous tone. But some other ones that I think are really powerful and I see tech startups using really effectively are, for instance, the ruler. That's really about helping someone get control over an unmanageable process or data or security. And so they're going to speak in a more authoritative, confident, maybe even calming tone to say, we've got you and you can take control of the situation with our software and our solution. Another one is the rebel. So this is a brand that is going up against the old way of doing things and old rules, and they're willing to break them to create change. And an example of this is Bumble. So if you look at their website, they use a lot of rebellious, buck the old way type language. And it's maybe not the most obvious tone of voice for a dating app, but they weave that with the lover archetype that's all about appreciation and self-love, and it creates this really unique tone of voice. Another one I think is great is the hero, and Peloton really embodies this. So the hero creates change in customers' lives by motivating them to achieve big goals and by really being their champion and their cheerleader. And so this is going to be very, you got this. You can see Peloton says, you can, we help you crush your goals. Right. They use language that's really about achievement and about doing hard things. So archetypes, there's, I think, nine other ones that we could go through, but they're a great way to think about, what's the way we create change in our customers' lives? And then what's a tone of voice that is really authentic to that and helps us talk with what I call power words, a really interesting language and a tone of voice that supports that and will resonate with your prospects and customers.
I love it. I need to look into the archetypes more. I would get into it now, except we're running low on time. And I know that would be like a whole other episode. But it's funny because when you say that in the fitness world, there's Nerd Fitness. I don't know if you've heard of them. And that's like the rebellious, like we're a bunch of nerds and we own it. And if you're a nerd and you want to get in shape, like I've never seen anyone else brand fitness in that way, because usually it's almost the opposite.
Totally. And you can see it is differentiating because the product is somewhat similar to what other companies offer, but by showing that they take it in a different direction through their tone of voice, it does make them stand out in the market. So I think that's really smart.
And their imaging is just hilarious on the website. It's so funny.
Well, that brings up a good point. Your brand personality and character not only informs your verbal personality and your verbal brand identity, but it should really drive your visual brand identity too. And lots of times startups start the other way. One of the first things they're doing is choosing a color palette and a font and a logo. But ideally, you want to think about this personality and have the visuals and the colors and the fonts really reinforce that way of creating change. So that's another nudge.
That's almost the whole science in itself. I mean, I just recently had my whole website redone, and I just told the designer, this is the feel I wanted. I said I wanted to be serious, but fun. And so the colors, I mean, there are colors that I chose that are fun, but she put exclamation points, like giant exclamation points. And just the way it's all set up is exactly how I wanted my brand to be, which is, I know my stuff, but yet I'm not super serious about, just like I can add personality to your copy is what I wanted to come across.
Sounds like you've got the sage with the expertise and the jester that can entertain and bring the humor combined into one. So I love hearing that.
I didn't look at it like that, but you know what? That makes sense. So I have merged all the three different archetypes. But the last question, you do a lot of copywriting, or at least do you do a lot of copywriting now?
I help founders figure out ways to do their own copywriting, especially before they have their marketing team. So yes, I have some favorite tips around that.
Yeah. So what are they for founders?
One of the easiest things I think is to make sure that the headlines tell the story. So how can someone who's only spending a few seconds on your site just scan, but get the big ideas? So what is your product? And again, what are some of those top benefits and differentiators? The second thing I love to emphasize is just parallel structure. So start everything with a verb or an adjective, and it makes it so much easier and more pleasant to read. It creates a level of flow. And it's a simple change, but it really does kind of elevate all of your copywriting. And along with that, use bullets, use shorter sentences, use things that are easier to scan. So simplify the language, but also make it easier to just see those key messages pop off, use bolding, that type of thing. And then the last one is just clear over clever. So avoiding jargon that's a little bit clever or maybe uses a lot of alliteration, which in theory zhuzhes up the copywriting, but can really make things harder to understand when you're reading as someone who doesn't understand your product or really believe that it's the best option yet.
Yeah. And those all make so much sense because people, they tend to think like copywriting is creative and you have to make it sound good, which, yeah, you'd love for it to sound good, but you also want to make sure your message is getting across like you want it to get across so people understand it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's probably the biggest tip. Make sure it's reflecting those key messages that you've already created. And that's why having a messaging framework actually makes the copywriting process so much smoother because it's just about expressing those key ideas in the right tone of voice in a really straightforward way that gets your prospects to keep reading.
And one last question that's not related to any of this, but it's just interesting to me. You narrated your own audiobook, correct?
Yes, I did.
Because I was listening to part of it before. How hard was that to do? Because I heard it's really tough, like tougher than you would think to narrate a book.
It is grueling, I will say, but I worked with a company and showed up at a studio 3 days in a row and read for 3 hours straight on each of those 3 days and had a director who was listening in my ear. So if I made a mistake, she was reading along with me. She would say, stop, go back, reread that sentence. So we were able to catch the errors along the way. But it was fun and it was exciting to go through the book. But yes, my eyes were glazed over and my throat did not feel great at the end of any.
Because I heard some other author was talking about that they, narrated their first book of their own, and they said it was just so tough. And I wouldn't think, but yeah, even if you enjoy doing that kind of thing, it's like not.
Yeah, it's a different skill set, but in the end, it was very satisfying. So I'm glad I got the opportunity to do that.
That's awesome. I'll have a link to your book. And where else can people find you if they want to connect with you and find out what you do?
Thank you. Yes. So Standout Startup has lots of messaging, copywriter writing, and then content tips. So you can pick that up on Amazon or Audible. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Allison Lettieri, or go to my website, AllisonLettieri.com, and I have some great resources, including how to create powerful product messaging on my resources tab. So check that out too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Allison. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Linda. This was great.